While everybody's scared of the Bitcoin price crashing to $92,000 today, two massive trillion-dollar banks have made a little bit of an interesting move into Bitcoin. Standard Chartered just came out and raised their previous Bitcoin price predictions to $500,000 per coin. And then the second trillion-dollar bank we've seen make a very interesting pivot into Bitcoin came from Franklin Templeton. And as you guys can see, they just launched Bitcoin indexes for their massive $1.4 trillion client base. So today I want to ask the question, do these trillion-dollar banks know something about Bitcoin that we don't? Why are they making a move into Bitcoin at a time when the markets are melting down just a little bit? Today, I'm going to be discussing all of that and more with my fellow co-founder of Bitcoin News, Rob Wallace. How you doing today, Rob?
Doing well. How you doing, Luke?
I'm doing great. What are your thoughts on these massive trillion-dollar banks?
Well, we are going to at least match gold's market cap at some point, right? And gold is hitting new all-time high after new all-time high. We are currently at $2,967 for gold. Remember, gold hit $2,000 back in 2011 or so, and then just wavered for a decade. And people thought that they had solved inflation, that they could just do all these QE between 2009 to 2015, blow up the money supply, and it wouldn't matter too much. But then we got to COVID and it got back up to $2,000 per ounce for gold. And then it languished again from 2020 to just the end of 2024. And now we've seen this exponential takeoff. So what does that mean? I think that means that we've got serious issues with the dollar, that there is a global monetary reordering going on before our very eyes. And the funny thing is, so few people know that gold has any value in this world today. Like, I just saw a video online, dude walking around on the street, he has one gold ounce, right? And a gold ounce is like this big. It's not that impressive if you don't know what it's worth. And so people are like, hey, would you give me $20 for this, right? They wouldn't do it. It's 1/100th of the price. They wouldn't do it. So I mean, it's crazy what is happening behind the scenes, and you've got to know. You've got to educate yourself at this time. We are at a pivotal point in human history, in monetary history, and if you don't know what's going on behind the scenes, if you are not educating yourself, you could be left behind, even if you live in a developed country like America.
Yeah, well, this is the thing about monetary transitions I think a lot of people don't understand. The everyday person, the lower and the middle class, they typically get absolutely wiped out in these monetary transitions because they don't pay attention to charts like the one that you literally mentioned. The price of gold is going absolutely bananas. I didn't realize that it was this parabolic. But again, the lower and the middle class, they typically don't have exposure to assets like real estate, like stocks that are going absolutely parabolic today. They store the majority of their assets in things like cash, and cash gets massively devalued in these monetary transitions, which is something I think that we're currently going through today, Rob. I think we are in some sort of a transition, and I think the price of gold is kind of like that alarm bell on the fiat system saying something is happening. And I think we need to be paying more attention to what these mega trillion-dollar banks are doing. Again, these guys are not small hitters. They both have assets under management somewhere around $1 trillion. And both of these guys have been recently making a move into Bitcoin. We can see Franklin Templeton, they've got a $1.68 trillion of assets under management. That's huge. And Standard Chartered, depending upon how you measure it, they kind of have around $800+ billion worth of assets. This is a little bit of a Google here, and Google's telling us they've got about $850 billion worth of assets as of 2024. So both of them are around that $1 trillion mark. And I think we need to watch what both of them are saying, but more importantly, doing with their own assets and their own funds. And they are slowly but surely just making that move into Bitcoin. Have you seen the more recent prediction by Standard Chartered, Rob, when they're talking about $500,000 Bitcoin by 2028?
Yeah, I mean, that's another cycle from now, essentially, right? So if we say we peak along the power law projections, right, between 200 to 300,000 K by the end of this year, which is kind of hard to imagine, right? I mean, we're already 2 months down in 2025, and many people have been calling for the peak of this bull market at the end of this year, right, between October through December. And according to power law projections, I know how much you hate the power law, but it's been a decent predictor in the past, right? And so that calls for 200 to 300,000 by the end of this year. But again, we've entered into this new era with institutions and the ETFs, MicroStrategy, buying up double the amount of issuance per day. And so there is this constant bid. As we were talking about last live stream, 90K seems to be this floor that will not be broken. And we saw a sell-off today, and we're still well above 90, right? So there are buyers at this mid to low 90s area, but we've yet to see that catalyst to really take us into that parabolic stage of the bull market as we saw in 2021 and in 2017.
Yeah, I think the fact that we're now watching TradFi, and a lot of people begin to come to the consensus that, $500,000 Bitcoin is programmed, that's when I start to, my spidey senses start to say, hang on a minute, what if everybody's wrong? Because Bitcoin does like to punish everybody. And like you say, I mean, the power law has been very accurate for 16 years now. For me, I get worried when people think they can outsmart the market and people start to project exactly where the price of Bitcoin is going. And we're even seeing this with very popular big Twitter accounts saying, look, $500,000 by 2028. It could come. It certainly could come. I want to jump back on over to the report from Standard Chartered. We can see they're predicting $200,000 Bitcoin by 2025 and potentially $500,000 Bitcoin in 2028. Like you say, Rob, that does kind of map what the Bitcoin power law is projecting, okay? If we do pull up the Bitcoin power law, you will be able to see that these projections by Standard Chartered kind of align with the projections made with the Bitcoin power law model. So here it is, and you can see Bitcoin is supposedly going to continue to see these diminishing returns and the price action neatly fit within these bands. Again, so far, don't get me wrong, my hat's off to Giovanni. Bitcoin has followed a power law until now. Who knows what it's going to do in the future? That's my biggest concern, my biggest question mark. But I do think it's interesting that we are seeing huge entities right now put their reputation on the line and talk about these massive Bitcoin predictions. And something I want to remind the people of about Standard Chartered is they were making Bitcoin predictions when it wasn't fun or it wasn't cool to be talking about $100,000 Bitcoin. Standard Chartered was making Bitcoin predictions when it was around $25,000, $30,000 a coin in the depths of the bear market just before the ETFs launched. Standard Chartered were predicting $100,000 Bitcoin by 2025. At the time, they were called crazy. People were saying, all of the TradFi was saying, there's no way Bitcoin's going to hit $100,000. I think the consensus in late 2023, early 2024, was that BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF was going to be used as exit liquidity. This is what everybody was saying. They were saying, oh, BlackRock's just dumping on your bags. BlackRock's dumping on the Bitcoin hodlers. And I think Standard Chartered, I mean, their reputation really does speak for itself. They were bullish on Bitcoin when it wasn't cool to be bullish on Bitcoin, which is why I think it's interesting that we see another report and another forecast about Bitcoin's price come out from Standard Chartered in early February. And they're once again still bullish on Bitcoin, despite the price potentially being a little bit boring to some people. I mean, again, when you really zoom out, I don't think there's much boring about this price action. That's because I have the Bitcoin price in monthly. But again, we know that most people suffer from recency bias, myself included. And when you do kind of have a look at Bitcoin on a more recent time frame, you can see we haven't really done much for 3 months now. Bitcoin's been going sideways. It's really starting to bore people to sleep. But I think the signal here, Rob, is the big boys are still coming. They're still buying, and they don't seem to be slowing down.
Yeah, and they're not buying your meme coin, right? They launched an Ethereum ETF and it's done horribly.
Mhm.
These other altcoins that have been around for a while, like Litecoin and Cardano, they seem to be getting ETFs under this new SEC regime. But at the same time, I don't think that's going to be doing much for these alternatives to Bitcoin. There is only one king, and Bitcoin is it. And the interesting thing that I saw in that article you had up is that Standard Chartered said that each year for the next 4 years, it'd be going up by 100,000. If you scroll down to that highlighted section, I think it said 200K this year, 300K 2026. Yeah, in 2027, 400, and then 500 in 2028. So that leaves no room for a bear market, right? These guys see a continuous growth going up $100,000 a year. And I mean, some people might call that boring, but that would actually be probably the best thing ever if Bitcoin had no bear market and was just gradually stair-stepping up 100K a year. Can you imagine?
It's going up forever, Rob. It is pretty interesting. I still haven't come to a conclusion on what we're going to see this bull market. Like heading into this bull market, I'm the most unsure on what we are going to see. I think you make a good point though, and I think so does RT in the Twitter chat. Bybit could be responsible for this little bit of volatility we're seeing in the markets today, and we are seeing volatility not just in Bitcoin but also the TradFi markets. I want to talk a little bit more later in the stream about the volatility that we're seeing in places like the volatility index, which is just pumped by 35% over the past 4 weeks. So there is a little bit of volatility, not just in the Bitcoin market, but also in the general TradFi market. I think before we get there, I think it's worth just nailing that point. That's also kind of brought up here by RT, and that's the fact that Bybit is responsible for this. Again, why did Bybit get hacked? I think a contributing factor could be the fact that, altcoins are in the mix over there at Bybit. Again, having altcoins in your hardware wallet or in your exchange, it adds a attack surface to whatever security protocol you might think you have. This is why we always encourage you guys, steer away from altcoins, just buy Bitcoin. We think Bitcoin is the only thing you should be buying and playing around with. There really is no second best when it comes to buying Bitcoin. Again, if you guys are looking for somewhere to buy your Bitcoin, we always encourage you guys to check out what Rhino Bitcoin is doing. We think they're the best place for you guys to get started buying your Bitcoin. You can buy Bitcoin on the app. You can sell Bitcoin on the app. You can even use the Rhino app to send Bitcoin anywhere around the world that you want to send it using the Lightning Network. This is, again, a very, very important thing. I think that is lost amongst many Bitcoin wallets. The accessibility and the ability to use Lightning. I'm down here in Bitcoin jungle in Costa Rica, and there are 400 merchants that accept Bitcoin. And all of that is done on the Lightning Network. So again, if you are looking for someone to buy Bitcoin, highly recommend you check out what Rhino Bitcoin is doing. They're even going to be giving you guys $10 of free Bitcoin if you sign up using the app, and if you use a promo code Bitcoin News. It's Bitcoin News, one word, but you do need a capital B and a capital N for Bitcoin and news. So make sure you do that to take advantage of that $10 discount you can get from Bitcoin News. But Rob, I want to talk a little bit more about what exactly is going on in the store value space. You reminded me, you brought up the fact that gold right now is going absolutely parabolic. I think this is a massive warning sign that something could be happening alongside the fact that the VIX is rising. I think whenever the VIX is rising, that is when we need to start paying attention to not just Bitcoin, but the TradFi markets. So do you see anything potentially on the horizon here in the realm of macro? I know a lot of people are kind of, let's say they're not so scared about recessions and incoming threats. I'm not either personally, but have you seen anything fly across your desk that might explain why we are seeing the volatility pick up in TradFi markets and what this might mean for Bitcoin if we do see a little correction or a little crash?
Yeah, so I think we got to zoom out a little bit, go back to Joe Biden's presidency, where they were just issuing a lot of debt, right? And using the stimulus measures, such as the COVID the Infrastructure Act that was nothing to do, the Inflation Reduction Act, which had nothing to do with reducing inflation. No, they were just spending a bunch of money, printing a bunch of money, sending it out to government programs and getting it into the pockets of people, which we know at the end of the day rises prices. It might help GDP in the short term, of course, but overall, the more money they print, of course, you have less purchasing power. Then we get to Trump. And we have Trump's election, and we have a bit of euphoria. Bitcoin jumps from 60,000 up to 95,000. There's animal spirits out there. People think this is going to be the best business environment in the history of America. It's going to be completely unregulated. Companies are going to be able to do whatever they want. And then Trump actually gets in office, and then we start to see some of the things that he's talking about. And it turns out this talk of tariffs is not just talk, but it's the real deal. There might have been a pause on the tariffs that are going on Canada and Mexico, but he's still real about them. He gave them a month to get their stuff together to meet his demands. But if that month comes to a close and they haven't, 25% on all the goods coming from Canada and Mexico, two of our largest trading partners, of course. So I think we're sort of coming off that high and euphoria of the Trump election. And now we're sort of chewing on and realizing that, hey, we are in the middle of a monetary reordering. It seems as if the Trump administration understands that this is necessary, and that probably means some pain. And in the last Trump administration, the stock market was by far the most important indicator to him. As long as the stock market was going up, he thought he was doing a great job as president. Now he says his new indicator is 10-year treasuries, right? He wants to bring those 10-year treasuries down so that people can buy houses once again. You can finance businesses easier. But that's going to cause some pain. And so especially if he doesn't care as much about how well the stock market is doing, we're at all-time highs, right? Like, we've never been this high before in the stock market. So to see a pullback, a cool down makes a lot of sense. And of course, that would affect Bitcoin prices as well.
You make a really good point there about US Treasuries. I'd completely forgotten and overlooked that. And again, I think overall, the summary of everything we've talked about here in this first little snippet is, hey, governments cannot be trusted. We should not be trusting our governments. They're incredibly incompetent, especially considering what I just saw hit my little desk this morning. And that is the fact that maybe, just maybe, America might have just lost their 193,000 Bitcoin stack. Now, I know that sounds really crazy, but I saw this news headline come out this morning. US officials allegedly don't know how much Bitcoin they hold. And as that article headline suggests, there are more than just allocations of mismanagement. So now I think we should turn our attention to this chart right here. America is supposed to hold tens of billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, but these new rumors with a little bit of substance behind them are suggesting that maybe America might have lost their Bitcoin. Some people are saying maybe America got hacked. Other people are saying maybe some people from the old Biden administration are quietly selling their Bitcoin right now. And that kind of explains the price suppression that a lot of people think is going on in the Bitcoin space. A lot of people have been surprised that Bitcoin isn't rallying here in Q1 2025. And some people have said maybe the US losing or selling that massive amount of Bitcoin that they do have, which is supposed to be around $13 billion worth. Maybe this is the sell pressure, keeping this Bitcoin beach ball under the water. I don't even know where to start here, Rob, because there's so much to break down. But where do you want to start unraveling this mystery of the US potentially losing their Bitcoin?
Yes, sir. Yeah, again, we got to zoom out, take a broader look, see what's going on. America has had about 190 to 200,000 Bitcoin on its balance sheet, or not necessarily on its balance sheet, but it's hidden away by the DOJ and watched over by the U.S. Marshals for years now, since the collapse of Silk Road and recovering the Bitfinex hack that happened around 2017, 2018. So they've got all this Bitcoin, and then we start hearing news that, Well, A, there was a court decision that said the Bitfinex hacked Bitcoin, which is, I believe, between 60 and 90,000 of that 190,000, belongs to the rightful owner, who is Bitfinex, right? So are we just going to hand that back? That's a question that's still up in the air. And then the other ruling was that the government has the right to start selling this Silk Road Bitcoin. Well, this all comes at the end of the Biden regime, while Trump on the campaign trail at Bitcoin Nashville in July last year said on stage that he wants to never allow them to sell the Bitcoin that they already have. So that fast forward to January, Trump is elected. We have ideas. Okay, maybe once he's power, they're going to start a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Cynthia Loomis is calling for the Bitcoin Act, where, of course, they buy 200,000 Bitcoin a year for 5 years, bringing the total to 1 million Bitcoin. But Cynthia Loomis sent out a letter to the U.S. Marshals and the Department of Justice, an official letter on U.S. Senate letterhead, saying, I want a report. You got to tell me. I'm a sitting senator. You got to tell me what's going on with this Bitcoin. Where is it? Well, that letter was sent out at the beginning of January. It had a deadline at the end of January. No response. We are now at the end of February. Still no response. And then we have this expose come out on CoinDesk last Friday, and they are even more disorganized and completely incompetent from what it seems like. Yeah, I mean, these guys are tracking the Bitcoin on Excel spreadsheets. They don't know what they're doing. They're definitely not crypto accountants. And are they selling? Did they lose it? Yeah, let's dig into this article and show the people what's going on.
Yeah, so super lengthy article that has been released on CoinDesk. I think something I want to double click on, Rob, is the fact that only last month, I believe, the date of this article is January 9th. So this is about 6 weeks ago. The federal government got the green light to sell $6.5 billion in Bitcoin seized from the Silk Road. So that's about a third of America's total stack. All right. So the federal government gets cleared to sell about a third of that 190,000 Bitcoin they own. And then we see this come out 6 weeks later, kind of saying, hang on a minute, what is going on? The US Marshals cannot even account for the Bitcoin they own, which is kind of, let's say, pop the tinfoil hats on the heads of those who are a little bit more speculative and untrusting of government. Again, there could be a Occam's razor response for what is actually going on. But at the end of the day, I think there is some pretty good evidence in this article to show that at the very least, the US government does not know how to custody or store the Bitcoin that they are supposed to be holding on to safely for you and I. Well, not me, I'm not American, but for the US people. Again, if the government is holding Bitcoin, it should be on behalf of the people, right? But what I think is interesting is there is clear examples of mismanagement. This little highlighted section of this article here, I want to read it here because it's very interesting. It shows the incompetence or the lack of education from the US Marshals, who should be holding on to this Bitcoin safely. So we can see here, the US Marshals did not have measures in place to track forked cryptocurrencies. For example, like Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin Satoshi Vision. So both of these were forked off of Bitcoin, but as a result, the US Marshals Office may fail to be able to identify and track these forked assets and therefore lose the opportunity to sell those assets when they are forfeited. So these guys can't even keep track of what happens to Bitcoin when you see a hard fork. And this turns into Bitcoin Cash and normal Bitcoin, small block Bitcoin, real Bitcoin. And again, they had the same mistake there with BSV. So if they can't tell the difference between two different forks of Bitcoin, how can we trust them to hold on to private keys?
Another quote from the article: not only would the USMS, the US Marshals, take weeks to provide Bitcoin deposit addresses to agencies when they would just make a seizure, he said, but the agency would simply share them over email without any sort of encryption or verification process. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. Something that some senators, like Senator Cynthia Lummis, think will be the bedrock of America's financial future, is being played with willy-nilly here by U.S. Marshals. Is it incompetence? Is it malice? I mean, it's so funny to think that 6 weeks ago, Joe Biden was still the president. Doesn't that just blow your mind? Like, how is that possible? So much has happened in the last just 4 weeks since Trump was inaugurated on January 20th.
That's actually crazy you say that. Time really does fly. It feels like so much has happened since Trump was elected, and it's pretty crazy that we're even discussing things like strategic Bitcoin reserves being talked about in not only states all across the US, but also nation states all around the world. But again, going back to that quote, I'm shocked by what you just said. Not only would the US Marshals take weeks to provide Bitcoin deposit addresses, but the agency would simply share them over email. What are they thinking? Is this the kind of thought and protection and privacy that goes into holding $14 billion worth of Bitcoin? I think it's a pretty clear case of incompetence is what we're looking at here, Rob.
It's incompetence, or, I mean, if you look at the tweets of David Bailey, the CEO of Bitcoin Magazine, I mean, he's had Trump's right ear for months now, and he's been saying that perhaps these guys at the U.S. Marshals have been selling it, and that could be a reason that we're seeing the price be stuck around 100K for the last couple months. I don't know. That's pretty conspiracy theory. On chain, as far as we know, the stuff has not moved. It's still there. U.S. Marshals are holding this Bitcoin through Coinbase, so we have these addresses and we can see if they move. But at the same time, this is just sad, the state that of what's going on here. We need a Fort Nakamoto. We need a proper place to put this Bitcoin, store this Bitcoin with proper security, because even if they don't buy anymore and they just keep this 190,000 Bitcoin, it'll be worth not tens of billions, but trillions within a decade or two, right? So it's of the utmost importance.
I couldn't agree more. And you kind of hit on where I want to take this next, this kind of discussion of price suppression. Again, we don't know whether the US Marshals is selling their Bitcoin. We don't know. We don't know what's happening. Like you say, the addresses are public and trackable. But I think a lot of people are they're interested by this discussion of price suppression. A lot of people think Bitcoin should be a lot higher. You mentioned on-chain data. And I think this is kind of interesting to look at when we consider the hodl waves. Because as Mitchell from Blockware here has pointed out, the OGs are simply selling some Bitcoin at $100,000. And this is natural. Like the hodlers do sell coins every time Bitcoin hits a new all-time high. And other people will say that, the price action looks a little bit interesting. Now, again, there was a little bit of debate flying back and forwards on Twitter recently between Samson and Checkmate, which was certainly entertaining and educational at the same time. But I think there is this massive debate right now surrounding price suppression. What is going on? What is happening? And that's because of the fact that we've just seen a lot of Bitcoin being bought recently. So this is a really cool tweet I wanted to show you guys from another on-chain an analyst. That's how you say it. James Van Straten here. And he shows that since April 20, 300 days ago, 130,000 Bitcoins been mined by the miners, and MicroStrategy alone has bought nearly double that, 264,000 coins. Then the US ETFs have acquired on net. So this is ignoring the Bitcoin that's sold by Grayscale. On net, the ETFs have bought 331,000 Bitcoin. And the other public companies, like the miners, for example, they've bought 40,000 Bitcoin. So a lot of people are seeing all of this buy pressure and they're a little bit confused. Why is the price not pumping, Rob? What is happening? And I think that's why stories like the one that we're covering now surrounding the US Marshals supposedly losing or is unable to account for the Bitcoin they're supposed to hold. This is where some interesting theories kind of get pieced together and saying, hey, are they selling? What's happening? At the moment, nobody really knows what's happening. So it's hard to make sense of, Rob. What's your read on this whole price suppression debate? And just how much buy pressure we have seen from these large entities I've highlighted here from this tweet.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny being on Bitcoin X, Bitcoin Twitter for 2 years, almost on a daily basis now. It's pretty clear to see that when price gets boring, knives come out, right? People want action, right? So if the price isn't going up, people start poking at each other. And so yes, this fight between Checkmate and Samson Mao is one of the latest examples of this, of two diehard Bitcoiners going at each other just because they're sort of bored, I think. But the question is the price being suppressed? Is Bitcoin being held down here at 100K? And I have to side with Checkmate. I think that for every buyer in Michael Saylor, there's a seller. There's an OG who bought for $10, who mined on their gaming computer back in 2012 and has been sitting on it for over a decade now. And when you can turn something that you bought for a couple $100 into a couple 100,000, maybe a couple million, you're going to do it, right? So Michael Saylor just bought $2 billion worth of Bitcoin in the last week, and it was most likely these OGs who handed it over to him. So Wicked had a great tweet that said, yeah, I mean, Saylor just bought $2 billion worth of Bitcoin, just bought 20,000 Bitcoin, and it was handed to him by OGs who are now going out and living their best life. So, I mean, we all trash fiat and say it's cash is trash and you don't want that for the long term. But if you're an OG, you're in a different position, right? If you've got a couple hundred Bitcoin, a couple thousand Bitcoin, peeling it off 20 Bitcoin for $2 million is not the hardest decision to make. So yeah, I think that we're just at a major psychological level. And despite the fact that there's all these institutions buying, there are plenty of people who have been in Bitcoin for over a decade who are willing to sell at these prices. And this is how Bitcoin gets distributed. Over 50 to 60% of Bitcoin is held by individuals. And that's one of the big knocks on Bitcoin, that there's all these people there's very few people with the vast majority of it. So it's only through selling and putting it into the market and being distributed that this Bitcoin gets distributed. And there's more of an equitable distribution of Bitcoin around the world. So at every major price level, we're going to see plenty of people who have been in it for 5-10 years want to sell, take some chips off the table and live their best life. So I think it's more of a fact that we're just at the sort of boring price action. Knives are coming out between people, personalities on Twitter. And if you cry about suppression, are you going to cry about suppression when the price rockets up $20,000, $30,000 in a couple weeks or a month?
That's I mean, a lot of people do talk about market manipulation. It's a great point. And when Bitcoin's boring, it's being manipulated to the downside. But when it's pumping, there's no talk of manipulation, which is interesting. I do like what you mentioned here about the whales and the OGs selling Bitcoin, because we can see a ton of profit taken by this chart here. So this is looking at the realized profit levels. And you can see when we did hit $100,000 per coin recently, we saw one of the largest spikes in profit taking. So this is OGs locking in a lot of profit. This is another visualization. It's kind of looking at something similar. This is looking at long-term holders. And we can see that the long-term holders have been selling a lot of Bitcoin when we first kind of hit $100,000. Maybe something that could be a little bit more optimistic of a read of this chart. Again, I could be reading it wrong, but it looks as if maybe we've seen a little bit of exhaustion in long-term holders selling. It looks as if the first time we hit $100,000 here, we saw a big spike of long-term holders selling in a similar way that we saw this earlier in the year. See this second largest yellow spike on this chart? For the first time that we hit $70,000 for a long time, you can see we saw that big spike in long-term holders selling. And then the longer that we were kind of at this 60 to 70K range that we were in for 7 or 8 months, all throughout 2024, the long-term holders kind of stopped becoming big profit takers. They kind of sold all of their bags, and then price rocketed to $100,000. Maybe we're seeing something similar now, Rob. Again, I don't know where the price of Bitcoin is going in the short or the medium term. All I do know is that right now, long-term holders are not selling as much Bitcoin as they were 2 months ago when Bitcoin was at the same price. So again, I don't want to fill you guys with too much hopium or bullish moon juice, but maybe, just maybe, the long-term holders could be close to finish selling their Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, who knows? I think $100,000 today is a hell of a discount. And I think whether you're buying Bitcoin at $100,000, $90,000, or $110,000 in 5 or 10 years, I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference.
Yeah, and just think about it like this. I mean, everybody who's watching this probably has some Bitcoin, and if you have some Bitcoin now, then you have probably bought some around $100,000. So when Bitcoin is 1 million or 5 million, and you decide to take a little off the table and treat yourself to something, are you going to be mad? Are you going to listen to the people who say never sell your Bitcoin, never, you don't touch it ever? No, Bitcoin is meant to be enjoyed too, right? I mean, we all have a low time preference, but if you've put in the work, studied, and been able to hold for half a decade to a decade, you have the right to treat yourself. And I don't think we can be mad at these whales for doing the same.
Exactly. And I think kind of back to the point of what we kind of began discussing here is that, I mean, if America has fumbled the ball, if they have lost the 193,000 Bitcoin that they're supposed to be holding, at the end of the day, they're going to have to get that Bitcoin back. They are going to have to buy it back. We know Trump's been incredibly bullish on Bitcoin. Even this is weeks ago, Donald Trump was saying that he wants all Bitcoin to be mined in the US. He wants all the Bitcoins to be mined, made, and minted in America. That's Donald Trump's exact words. So I think at the end of the day, the signal is the largest nation state in the world is bullish on Bitcoin, and the largest nation state in the world is openly saying we want to be a global superpower when it comes to Bitcoin mining, okay? Now, that is a topic I think most people are certainly not paying enough attention to. Bitcoin mining is one of the most underrated topics and talking points in the Bitcoin space. And again, I'd just like to remind you guys, if you are interested in learning more about not only Bitcoin mining, but also Bitcoin, the largest Bitcoin mining conference in the whole world is literally going down in just over 4 weeks in Florida, United States. So again, Mining Disrupt is the conference we're talking about. That's happening on March 25th, March 26th, and March 27th. That's right. It's a 3-day event, and there's going to be some really big names speaking at this conference. Dennis Porter is going to be speaking at the conference. He's the man doing a lot of work behind the Bitcoin strategic reserve push happening all over America. We're going to have some very big politicians speaking at the event. As you guys can see, it's a pretty nice event. There's all sorts of educational, fun games happening at Mining Disrupt. If you guys haven't got your tickets yet for the conference, we'd encourage you guys, you can use a promo code Bitcoin News to get 20% off your tickets. So again, use the link in the description of today's video to jump on over there and get your tickets while they last. That conference is happening in about 4 weeks from now. So it's February 24th today. Do not snooze. Do not wait. Go and check out Mining Disrupt 2025. Because again, I think mining, Bitcoin mining, it really is entering the mainstream. We have countries like America, the largest nation state in the world, having a sitting president openly say that he wants every Bitcoin to be mined, made, and minted in the country of America. And this kind of is creating a little bit of global FOMO. Obviously, we have smaller countries like the Kingdom of Bhutan openly talking about mining Bitcoin. And then more recently, I think we might have discussed this on a previous live stream last week, Rob, the fact that, was it the UAE sovereign wealth funds got something like $400 million worth of Bitcoin exposure. Lots of other nations in the Middle East, like Oman, they have about $1 billion invested into Bitcoin mining. El Salvador's mining Bitcoin. It kind of feels like we are entering this stage of global FOMO when it is talking about, nation states and them quietly mining Bitcoin. What's your read on the state of, this global FOMO that we're watching unfold here, Rob?
Yes, there's plenty of nations mining Bitcoin right now, right? The difficulty has just charged straight up for over the last year. That means that there's more miners being added to the network, there's more hash rate, and of course, Bitcoin has this amazing function called the difficulty adjustment. Every 2 weeks, depending on how much hash rate is added to or taken away from the network will self-adjust and make sure that blocks are created on average every 10 minutes. So as we've seen this hash rate just be added relentlessly to the network from 2023 through 2024, it's become harder and harder to mine Bitcoin. You need more and more hash rate in order to try to win a block. So yeah, that means there's, and of course that little dip that you see around 2021, that was the China ban. But since then, the summer of 2021, it's gone straight up, right? And what have we seen since then? We've seen the Russia-Ukraine conflict. We've seen Russia get cut off from SWIFT and having its treasuries frozen. And so they needed an alternative way to transact with other nations in the world. Are they mining Bitcoin? Yes, absolutely. There's been a flurry of laws coming out of Russia just within the last couple of months. They're doing some interesting things where they are banning Bitcoin mining in some regions, such as Siberia, where the electricity is needed for heat, but they're letting it flourish in other ones. Kazakhstan, of course, has been historically one of the largest Bitcoin miners in the world. But I think what's also really cool about Bitcoin mining is that it's not only for the big boys. There's also a home pleb miner revolution going on right now. From everything from the BitAxe, which is a 1.5 terahash miner. It's a small little box like this big that sits on your desk and has a little fan and can mine a couple, like 10 to 20 sats a day if you're in a FPPS pool that shares the findings. But one of these little miners that you can have sitting on your desk has found a block, right? That's $300,000 worth of Bitcoin has been found by this tiny little computer. So we're seeing all the democratization of Bitcoin mining, which is really, really cool. And another great thing that happened just this weekend in Denver at this Bitcoin location called The Space. If you're in Colorado, I highly recommend that you check it out. They just had a Mining for Heat Summit, where they had a collection of all the greatest minds in the world discussing, you see, I mean, these Bitcoin miners, what do? They consume electricity, run a bunch of code, and kick out hash and heat. Well, if you look at this box as primarily a heat generator rather than a hash generator, and look at Bitcoin as the byproduct instead of heat being the byproduct, it completely flips the way that you consider this industry and realize that comfort heat is a huge consumer of electricity around the world, right? And so if we are able to use these Bitcoin miners as heat generators while giving you the benefit of Bitcoin on the back end, we're going to see these things proliferate all over the world, from hotels heating spas. There's spas in New York City that are literally heated by Bitcoin miners. And so, yeah, and these guys in Denver, they had jacuzzis out. It's snowing outside in Denver right now, right? They got snow on the ground, but they've got two S19J Pros heating up immersion fluid that crosses against regular water, heats up the water, and fills up these jacuzzis. And it's hot tub hashing, right? It's spa 256. You're enjoying the luxury of heated water while you're also making Bitcoin. So Bitcoin mining is a fascinating rabbit hole to go down, and never before has it been easier to mine from home. And you don't need to consume as much electricity as a whole house in order to do so. You can just have a little miner sitting on your desk and contribute to the democratization of hash rate around the world.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a live stream earlier with the Simply Bitcoin guys, and I met one of the regulars from the live stream chat, Satwise, and he had a little heat bit in the back of his little setup, and it's crazy. He was telling us how he was mining Bitcoin and, like you say, participating in this decentralized network by simply just mining Bitcoin at home, taking that electricity and turning it into heat. It was absolutely crazy. I think you've started a revolution here, Rob. Nate Black in the chat here says SPA 256. First time I heard that, and that is a cracker, a SPA 256. But I think this is where this energy revolution is inevitably going. Every pool, every spa, every hot tub, every jacuzzi, in the not too distant future, it will be really silly and very obvious that you should be heating those things with something that's actually going to pay you back for the electricity that you use to heat these things. And this is why I do think a Bitcoin miner is probably going to be in nearly every home across the world. Again, this might vary from country to country, but I think it's only a matter of time before we do start seeing everybody mining Bitcoin, which means that charts like these are only going to look even stupider in the future when everybody is forced to mine Bitcoin. Hash rate is going to continue to go up and to the right forever. And like the Bitcoin price, this is a train that cannot be stopped. Do you have any other thoughts on the mining revolution we're seeing unfold at the moment, Rob, or the hash rate?
Yeah, just going back to the Trump statement that he wants all Bitcoin to be mined in America. I mean, if you know anything about Bitcoin or Bitcoin mining, you know that's nearly impossible and is extremely foolish if you really try to go after that objective. But what is Trump talking about? I mean, he wants to bring industry back to America. He wants to up our electricity production. I mean, the funniest line in his whole entire speech at Bitcoin Nashville over the summer was, "We're going to make so much electricity. So much electricity. You're going to say, Mr. President, please, that's too much electricity. I can't take it anymore. Please stop the electricity." So, I mean, this guy, I mean, he's a comedian, number one. And it's hard to tell his grasp of certain intellectual things here. But he does seem to think that Bitcoin mining is a benefit for this country, that it should be located in America. And I agree that it should be a focus of this country to make sure that we do have a certain percentage of total hash rate within our country's borders. And I think every nation will soon think that way once they realize that, hey, we need a neutral monetary asset in order to enter into this new era of the global monetary reordering. And I think gold and Bitcoin are going to be at the center of that, right? So Bitcoin mining on your country's soil is going to be very important moving forward. Trump seems to grasp some of that, maybe too much. But yeah, I'm glad that he is pro Bitcoin mining compared to the last administration that really was doing some crazy things, trying to track every single miner in this country, see how much electricity they're consuming and whatnot. There were some really wild things that they were proposing that thankfully got shut down and were not able to flourish under a second Joe Biden or Kamala administration.
Well, the last administration nearly lost its mind, Rob. Some of the proposals that they were putting through it was mind-boggling. I think we are very lucky that we don't have Kamala as president of the United States. That would have been a very, very dire situation. It's interesting that you did mention the current administration and how well off we are right now with the current administration, because I've seen some very interesting signs over the past week that the number one and the number two guys at the FBI both appear to be very, very interested in Bitcoin. And a lot of people are asking the question, what does the FBI potentially know about Bitcoin that we don't? Because the number one newly elected FBI director is this gentleman right here, Kash Patel. It's been revealed in some court filings that he owns well over $100,000 worth of Bitcoin. And I thought, okay, that's cool. That's interesting. But I wasn't that interested in it until I saw the next headline. And that is the fact that the number two guy at the FBI is not only a podcaster, but he's also very, very bullish on Bitcoin. So I'm talking about this gentleman here called Dan, I hope I don't butcher his last name, Bongino. And he has a history of being very, very bullish on Bitcoin and publicly tweeting things like this. This is the whole tweet: X, Truth, Rumble, and Bitcoin. So we now have the number one and the number two guy at the FBI, I didn't mean to make that rhyme, openly bullish on Bitcoin. What do you think about this current administration, Rob, and what this could potentially signal for the future of Bitcoin in America?
It's good signs, right? Kash Patel, definitely a tough guy. Same with this Bongino. He's former Secret Service. Yeah, so Kash Patel, I believe his story, he was working as security in some regard, head of the forces that were there for January 6th. He asked Nancy Pelosi if he could bring in these extra security measures and whatnot, and he was halted from doing so. And then when he tried to speak up about it, he was persecuted, and he had to go through a bunch of crap over the last couple of years. But he's been resurrected and put in top of the FBI, and now he's coming back with a vengeance, and he wants his sweet revenge. But yeah, I mean, he seems pretty based. He's a Bitcoiner. I sent you that video. That'd be great to play, of him actually talking about the Federal Reserve. That was pretty shocking, even more so than the fact that he owns 100K in Bitcoin ETFs and 100K in Bitcoin miner stock.
Yeah, so this is the one that you tweeted out from the Bitcoin News Twitter account. I won't play it because I didn't get the chance to download it, but this is the FBI director. This is a direct quote. The Federal Reserve is not a public government entity. It's a private entity manipulating currency to their advantage, and that needs to be tackled. This is the director of the FBI, who sounds like a Bitcoin maximalist. This is pretty crazy, Rob. That one that you tweeted out, it caught the attention of a lot of people. I mean, that got 8,000 likes. So obviously this is catching the attention of the cultural zeitgeist. People are saying, hang on a minute, we might finally have an administration who understands reality. They understand economics. They're questioning the Federal Reserve and their ability to print money out of thin air. This is obviously very rare, something we haven't really seen in a long time in America, and it's certainly an optimistic and bullish thing that we are seeing develop in the West.
Yeah, it seemed as if we've entered this new era of routing out corruption, or at least bringing the dark to light and trying to, as he said, tackle the biggest issues that have been lingering for over a century now, between Elon and Doge, Kash Patel calling out the Federal Reserve, Trump saying that he's going to go to Fort Knox with Elon and inspect if the gold is actually there. He keeps hinting at the fact that the gold has been stolen. Trump said this at CPAC. He said it again today when he was in a press conference with the French president, Macron. He's like, we're going to go to Fort Knox and we're going to see if the gold is stolen. Wouldn't that be crazy if the gold was stolen? Like, what is he priming us for, right? Like, what is going on here? Why is all that gold leaving the London vaults and heading back to New York? Why is this repatriation of gold happening around the world? So yes, it does seem as if we are in this phase shift, right? This age of Aquarius has just opened up, and we are going to show all the badness that's been going on behind the scenes. Are people ready for it? I don't know. We are in the game of education and trying to open people's eyes to what's going on, especially when it comes to money and Bitcoin and finance. But there's a lot of bad stuff that's been buried for years. And is the world ready for it?
I don't know whether the world is ready to see it. I think there's always going to be individuals suffering from Stockholm syndrome, and they're always going to love their governments and those who they consider to be the experts and the portrayers of truth. But then we live in this alternative world where it looks as if truth is spreading everywhere. And I really like this tweet that you sent me, Rob, from Stephen Lubka at Swan. And he says here, Bitcoin has decided long ago to invest heavily in, let's say, regarded podcasters who hate the government. Many people criticized this strategy and said it made no sense. However, the government is now run by said podcasters who hate the government. Checkmate. I love that tweet. I think it is interesting. It has a little bit of a truthful undertone to it, despite it being a little bit humorous. And it is the fact that we now have podcasters in high positions of power. That's who this man is. I'm just going to call him Dan. I'm going to let you pronounce his last name, Rob. But Dan is a podcaster. That is literally who he is. I also saw a funny tweet here by Pierre Richard, and he said, myth, government will ban Bitcoin. Reality, Bitcoin podcasters will take over government. And this is exactly what's happening. It's crazy. Trump names podcaster to be the second in command at the FBI. What are your thoughts on this potential little bit of a revolution we are seeing unfold here, Rob? And people with microphones, and they seem to be, elected in all sorts of high positions of power all around the world.
Yeah, I mean, as Elon says, we are the media now, right? People listen and people trust these podcasters and whatnot more than the mainstream media, and rightfully so. Dan Bongino here, he is a podcaster, yes, quote unquote, but he does have the goods to back it up. He was in the Secret Service, and he had a show on Fox for a long time before being, I don't know if he got kicked off of Fox or he quit, but yeah, he started his own podcast and then got put into this role after that. But he seems, I looked up some clips from his time on Fox, and he's had multiple debates actually between Patrick Bet-David and Peter Schiff on gold versus Bitcoin. I think he himself, he might have been sponsored by some gold sellers and whatnot. So he's been a big gold bug for a while now. But yeah, it's interesting times, and the internet is technology has always allowed for the spread of freedom, right? From the printing press, ending the control of, or the combination of state and church, and now the internet, hopefully being the end of the combination of state and money. And we are using the internet to spread the word.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. It makes a lot of sense. I like the parallels between that revolution in the 1500s you mentioned with the separation of church and state. I feel like, the Bitcoin revolution, and in combination with what the internet started, I feel like it is going to do something very similar to what we saw 500 years ago. And that is separation and democratization of information for all. And I think, the fact that we are seeing podcasters elected as the number 2 man at the FBI, I think it's pretty crazy. It is pretty crazy how far the world has come, and how online discourse is all of a sudden changing how we not only see politics, but we also see the markets. And that kind of gets me into something else I wanted to discuss, Rob. And that's the fact that markets all around the world could be showing signs that some interesting things could be happening. I just saw recently that the volatility index just rallied by 30% over the past 4 weeks. A lot of people have been sharing this chart, and they've been saying, hey, wait a minute, what exactly is going on around the world? Especially when we consider not only the VIX is pumping, but the 4th largest economy in the world, Germany, is discussing the need to print 200 billion euros in emergency defense spending. And all of this is happening at the exact same time that the ECB just recorded one of its biggest losses in the entire world. So the question is, why is Germany talking about the need to create $200 billion in emergency defense spending when last time I checked, Rob, there wasn't a massive world war that needed $200 billion of euros created out of thin air? So why are we seeing all of these interesting headlines come out at the same time as the markets seem to be showing just a little bit of volatility, with the VIX spiking by, 35% in the past 4 days, which is very interesting data. I want to kind of unravel what could be going on in the macro front, Rob. And have you seen any of this, and what's kind of catching your attention these days in the realm of macro?
Yeah, Anthony Pompliano went on CNBC this morning, and he was discussing the Mar-a-Lago Accord. So there's been some great discussion of this on X between a writer for Bitcoin News and Bitcoin Insights, Infra. Definitely go follow our boy Infra. He's a wealth of knowledge. And then also Jim Bianco talking about this Mar-a-Lago Accord. What does that mean? Well, we are stuck in the Triffin's dilemma, right? America prints the world reserve currency, and that means that the world is in desperate need of dollars always in order to buy goods from each other. So America has shipped out its industrial base, hollowed it out, and we just buy everything from everybody else to provide the world with these dollars that they desperately want. So that's led to a lot of pain, right? There's the Rust Belt. We have no more industry in America. And over the last couple of years, particularly with Russia and Ukraine, we saw that we are not ready for, oh, nice, you pulled it right up. We are not ready for a conflict in terms of providing our own ammunition and munitions if it was to come to that. So Pompliano is talking about the Mar-a-Lago Accord, where we are able to weaken the dollar, bring back industry, and create what we need on the soil in America. And there's three aspects of this. Yes, tariffs, to get into better trade deals with everybody that we interact with. Two, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which could include monetizing assets, such as marking up the gold that we have from $40 an ounce, the price that it was marked at in the 1970s, up to its current value, which is basically $3,000 an ounce, adding $800 billion to the American balance sheet that we could borrow against or do who knows what with, and then reduce debt. And Pompliano was talking about this today, that this would cause, how would we do this? We would tell Europe, hey, we're not footing the bill for NATO anymore. You got to pay for your own defense, or you pay us to defend you. And that would be a direct reason why Germany would need to go and print 200 billion euros for emergency defense spending, because it also came out this week that Trump is not a fan of Zelensky. He wants this war in Ukraine to be over. He thinks that the Ukraine government, led by Zelensky, has robbed America, essentially, that they've been very undemocratic, not allowing for elections to happen over the last 3 years while this conflict has been going on. So yes, very interesting things are afoot. And for our European brothers and sisters out there, I feel for you. You're sort of stuck in this hard place, right? Your continent has also been deindustrialized, but you're also cut off from energy. You've shut down your nuclear power plants. I guess Ukraine, they're saying, is the one who blew up Nord Stream 2, so you don't have oil from Russia anymore either. I mean, it's a very precarious situation that Europe finds itself in now, having to pay for its own defense without energy, without industry, and with Trump and Putin seem to be coming together at the table in Saudi Arabia in the coming weeks. So very interesting things going on, and this Mar-a-Lago Accord and a weakening dollar could be at the center of it.
It's a fascinating thought experiment you've just kind of sent me down while we're on this live stream at the same time. And so again, hypothetical thinking caps on for a moment. It looks as if Trump wants to end war. I think that's what you're saying there, Rob. And Germany is saying we need an emergency $200 billion euros now. We need it now, hypothetically, again, thought experiment hats on, before any war might end. They're trying to nearly, what's it called? The final fiat fleecing. They're trying to get all of the money out of the situation. Let's call it the opportunity. They're just trying to get as much money out of the opportunity as they can while they still see an opportunity. I want to be very careful with what I do say here. But that's a really interesting thought experiment I actually hadn't considered. But again, it does look like many central banks are being faced with many different curveballs right now, not just the ECB, who will be forced to make a decision on whether they do allow 200 billion euros just to be created out of thin air to give to Germany. But we also see over here, the Federal Reserve could potentially be seeing the risks of higher inflation. And again, we could be seeing a little bit of a battle between the Federal Reserve and Donald Trump, because the Fed might be saying, hey, you know, we're not sure what we want to do with rate cuts yet. But the Fed, obviously led by Donald Trump, wants to bring down interest rates. Trump loves lower interest rates. And again, we know while we're talking about inflation, it's always good to remember that government inflation in the red on this chart, it never actually tracks real inflation. I always like to remind you guys, there are alternative ways and alternative measures that I always encourage people to be checking in on when we're talking about inflation. And this chart here comes from a website called Govflation. So this simply tracks the way governments used to track inflation. And we can see in the green, we can see real inflation today is much closer to 10.5%, not the 2.9 that governments will claim it is at. That's a little bit of a side tangent or a side rabbit hole. I'm not sure we want to get into that today or not, Rob, but I think at the end of the day, central bankers look to be faced with a little bit of a pickle and a little bit of a jam on their hands in regards to what their next move should be.
Yeah, as long as they've got control of the money printer, they're going to use it, right? When you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So yes, when there's lots of issues going on right now. America wants a weaker dollar. How do they do that? They print money. Europe needs money for defense. How do they get that? They print money. China needs to save themselves from a deflation debt spiral. How do they do that? They print money. So it seems as if the whole entire world is, or at least the government class around the world, is incentivized to print. And that means that they are stealing your purchasing power. How do you protect your purchasing power? Bitcoin.
It really is as simple as that, isn't it, Rob? At the end of the day, all roads lead to more and more money printing, and governments are just going to turn more tyrannical. Again, I think that every questionable decision being, let's say, pushed into law by government, it's all because of the debt issue they have. Okay, again, if they have too much debt, what's the first thing they can do? You can obviously print money, devalue the money, and pay off your debt with the devalued dollars. So more money printing means higher inflation, which means higher cost of living. So if you're living in that country with a lot of debt, that's not good for you. What else can a government do to raise money and pay off debt? It can tax businesses, tax individuals, and raise taxes on those individuals and those businesses. This is why we're seeing crazy things talked about in not only my home country, my ex-home country of Australia, and France and Canada, like what's it called? Citizenship-based taxation. We're seeing Western countries talk about things like citizenship-based taxation, as well as unrealized capital gains taxes. Why? The government is bankrupt. It needs more money to pay off its debt. Again, you could even get a little bit more conspiratorial and start asking yourself or thinking about why were certain administrations and why are certain Western countries, not just America, but also countries, immigration laws. Why do we just welcome millions and millions of people into our borders every year? I don't know. Just something for you guys to think about, but I think it's a perfect way to keep a property Ponzi alive and just funneling more and more people into the property Ponzi. Again, more population, that means you got to have more houses and you got to keep the property bubble propped up. But again, I think everything we see in the political realm can be explained in the economic realm, depending upon how much validity you think there is to these theories. But I think at the end of the day, money is the base layer of society. And if we do have a broken economic system, it's becoming more and more untenable to try to balance everything. And this is kind of something All Night Hider here mentioned in the chat. You do have to be careful with the balance, because if the Dixie spikes too much, it's a crazy wrecking ball to other economies that do hold this US dollar debt. So it is kind of looking like central bankers are kind of finding themselves in between a rock and a hard place.
That's where we're at. That's where they're at. And that's why the Mar-a-Lago Accord makes sense. A weaker dollar helps everybody who has dollar debt, and that is every country on the earth.
I tend to agree. I'd be fascinated to know how many of the guys in the live chat here agree with that statement. Just having a look at the live chat, we've got 4,395 of you guys tuning in between YouTube and Twitter. So we just like to say welcome. We do host these live streams. We're going to be doing these long form ones, I think at least once a week, if I can twist Rob's arm into coming on and helping me out with them. So again, if you are enjoying the live streams, make sure you're subscribed, and you will be notified when these are live over on YouTube and Twitter. And again, if you did join the live stream a little bit late, you can rewind and to the beginning of the stream where Rob and I were breaking down everything that's happened over the past few days. But I think Rock VTM has summarized something very, very simple that most of the 4,400 of you guys should just be thinking about, and that is just buy the dip. Again, I don't know if that's a Gandhi quote or not, but just buy the dip. It's as simple as that. Bitcoin today, at the time of recording, some people have joined the chat and they're a little bit concerned about the price of Bitcoin. But again, at the end of the day, I'm not sure where the dip is when we pull up here with the 1,000 tabs I've got open for you guys. But eventually I might be able to pull up the price chart of Bitcoin, and we can see that I don't think there's much of a dip evident right now. We're at $90,000+ a coin. And I mean, when you zoom out, any dips that we might see on the hourly charts, they seem pretty insignificant when you zoom out and appreciate the chart of the best performing asset in human history. And that is Bitcoin. I mean, have a look at it. It is going up forever. And they look very, very insignificant. But I think Rock VTM there kind of summarized our work there pretty easily, Rob. Buy the dip. It's as simple as that.
Buy the dip. They're printing money. They've got no way out, but you do. You have an opportunity. Stake your claim. There's only 21 million.
I think that is such a succinct and beautiful note to end today's stream on. With all that said, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in, and we will wish you all a happy rest of your month.